The kid said it like he was reporting the weather, not like he was dropping a brick into a man's chest, and the biker didn't answer right away. He just looked at him and then at his own phone like it had betrayed him. Your wife never made it to work, the runaway said again, softer this time, and the biker, people called him Rafe, nobody used his full name unless it was paperwork or police, pressed the side button and turned the phone off, not out of anger, but like he was sealing something inside it. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The garage still smelled like oil and old rain. The other bikes lined up quiet like they were listening, and nobody spoke because they all saw the same thing at once, which was that Rafe wasn't surprised enough, and that meant something had already gone wrong before the boy ever opened his mouth. He crouched a little so he was eye level with the kid, not gentle, not rough, just steady. Start from when you saw her, he said. The boy scratched his neck, dirt under his nails, voice thin. I didn't see her. I saw the car. Same when you dropped her in yesterday. Door open. Engine cold. Parking lot behind the clinic. There was a man sitting on the hood, smoking like he owned it. He asked me if I knew you. Someone behind Rafe shifted boots on concrete. That was Ludo, heavy shoulders, always breathing through his nose like he smelled trouble before it came. And you told him what? Ludo asked. The kid shrugged. I said maybe. He said tell the biker his phone shouldn't be off today. Silence again, thicker now. Rafe's jaw moved once. Yesterday he'd made a small decision. The kind leaders tell themselves is nothing. The kind that doesn't get discussed in meetings. He left his phone off for 3 hours while they moved a shipment that wasn't exactly legal, but wasn't supposed to be dangerous either. And he'd told himself he deserved the quiet because last time he'd answered during a run, distraction had cost a man 2 fingers and half his grip. That was the old failure, the one nobody mentioned, but everyone steered around like a pothole. So yesterday, he'd chosen silence. Cause. Now, effect was standing barefoot in front of him. You talked to anyone else? Rafe asked. The kid shook his head. Just you. Like he said. What's your name? Mika. Rafe nodded once like he was accepting a package. Behind him, someone muttered, could be a bluff. That was Sarah, leaning on a workbench, grease on her wrist, eyes sharp enough to cut wire. She handled the club's books and its lies, and she didn't trust messages delivered by strangers. Rafe stood up slow. If it was a bluff, he'd want me nervous, not informed. He looked at Ludo. Truck cameras still down. Ludo nodded. Since Tuesday. Another small decision. They hadn't rushed to fix them because nothing had happened Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday. Rafe rubbed his thumb along his knuckles. His wife Mara wasn't fragile. Never had been. She'd married into noise and engines and men who spoke in half sentences. But she also knew patterns, and she never left her car door open. Who else knows she's my wife? Rafe asked. Sarah answered without thinking. Anyone who reads property records. Anyone who watches you long enough. Anyone who asks the wrong clerk the right question. That was when it settled in him. Not panic, something heavier like wet cloth laid across the shoulders. Systems, not fists. Whoever sat on that hood wasn't muscle. He was a message. The kid shifted again. He said something else. Rafe looked down. Say it. He said you were supposed to return a call last night. Said you don't get to miss two. Ludo swore under his breath. Rafe didn't. He already knew which call. Unknown number, 10:14 p.m., while he was checking inventory sheets and half listening to the game on low volume. He'd watched it ring, let it stop, told himself if it mattered they'd leave a voicemail. They hadn't. Small decision. He felt Sarah watching him, not judging, just measuring. Leaders didn't get the luxury of secrets. They got the burden of them. We can move her, Ludo said. If this is pressure, we relocate, shut doors, go quiet a week. Rafe shook his head once. Too late for quiet. They already sat on her hood. The kid blinked. He wasn't mean, he said, like that mattered. He just waited, like a teacher. That landed harder than if the man had waved a gun. Rafe walked to the metal table where a map was pinned under bolts and picked up his dead phone, turning it in his hand like he might read yesterday through the glass. You remember his face? He asked. Mika nodded. Plain, like if you saw him at a store, you wouldn't see him again. Of course. Gravity, not thunder. Sarah pushed off the bench. Rafe. Just his name, but inside it was a question. Do we circle up or do we scatter? He didn't answer yet. His eyes were on the map, but not seeing roads. He was seeing the last time he'd ignored a small thing. Years ago, when a courier said a gate looked different than usual and Rafe had waved it off because schedules mattered more than feelings, and 10 minutes later sirens had eaten the night and a man named Evo had screamed in his sleeve where fingers used to be. Since then, Rafe treated small things like lit matches. And still, last night, he'd let one burn out on its own. Kid, he said, why tell me? You could have walked. Mika looked confused. He said you'd know what it means. Rafe exhaled through his nose. There it was. Not a threat. A reminder. Someone believed he already understood the rules of a game he didn't remember joining. Ludo stepped closer. Say the word, and I'll pull the boys. Sarah's voice cut in low. And say the wrong word, and we confirm we're scared. They looked at Rafe, all of them. Even the bikes seemed to lean. Leadership for him was mostly pauses. He pressed the phone's power again, though he knew it would stay dark. If I turn this on, he said, it rings. If it rings, we answer. If we answer, we're in conversation. Conversation means terms. And if you don't, Sarah asked. Rafe met her eyes. Then they stopped calling and started adjusting. Nobody liked that word. Adjusting meant pressure, moving somewhere softer. Ludo glanced toward the open garage door like he expected to see a sedan idling already. The kid hugged his own elbows. Am I in trouble? He whispered. Rafe shook his head. Your information. He reached into his vest, pulled out some folded bills, handed them over. You didn't see us. You don't come back today. Mika took the money but didn't move. The man said one more thing, he said. He said you're not the kind who runs. He said that's why this will work. The air changed. Not louder, not colder, just set like concrete finally poured. Sarah's jaw tightened a little. Ludo looked at the floor. Rafe closed his fist around the dead phone and nodded once to nobody in particular because the shape of it was clear now. The missed call, the camera still broken, the clerk who talked too much, the man on the hood who didn't hurry, all of it pieces of a decision he'd already made without knowing. And whatever this was had started before this morning and would keep going whether he liked it or not. And he understood then that walking away wasn't a door they could use anymore. It was a wall. They were already pressed against. Rafe turned the phone on and set on the metal table instead of holding it, like he didn't want it learning his pulse. And the screen lit his face from below so the others could see the tired lines he never talked about. Nobody rushed him because this part was always slow, the space between knowing and deciding. And the club had learned that if you filled that space with noise, you usually regretted it later. The phone didn't ring right away, which was worse, because it meant whoever was on the other end knew patience better than they knew fear. Ludo cracked his knuckles once. We still got time to move her, he said, but it sounded thinner now, like even he didn't believe in exits. Sarah wiped her hands on a rag that was already dirty. Moving her tells them she matters, she said. Right now, they're testing how much. Rafe didn't look at either of them. He was watching the signal bars climb like a slow thermometer. Cause and effect. That's how he'd always try to run things, not force and reaction, but choice and result. Because fists made noise and noise attracted people who kept records. Years ago, he'd promised himself he wouldn't lead like the men before him, the ones who solved questions with volume and then wondered why the walls closed in. Still, promises got slippery when someone parked on your life. The phone buzzed. No ringtone, just vibration against steel. Everyone heard it. Rafe let it buzz 3 times before he picked it up. Yeah, he said. Not hello. Not who's this. Just yes, like he'd been mid-conversation all morning. The voice on the other end sounded ordinary, mid-range, the kind you forget while it's still talking. You were difficult to reach. I was busy. You're busy now. Not a question. Rafe leaned his hip against the table. You sat on my wife's car. I sat on a car. Your wife is a conclusion you reached. Sarah's eyes flicked up at that. She liked sentences that told on themselves. Rafe said nothing. Silence made people explain. The voice continued, calm as paperwork. We need a correction, Rafe. Something passed through your garage 2 nights ago that belongs to a process, and your people treated it like freight. That slows things. Ludo frowned, confused, but Sarah's head tilted a fraction. She handled manifests. She knew what had come and gone. Rafe spoke carefully. We move what we're paid to move. Of course, and we appreciate efficiency. But this item wasn't yours to move yet. Then someone miscommunicated. Yes, the voice said, almost pleased. That's what we're fixing. Rafe watched a drop of oil slide along the table's edge. My wife's part of your fix. Your wife is part of your attention span. The line stayed quiet after that. Not dropped, just waiting. Ludo mouthed something that looked like say the word. Sarah didn't move at all. Rafe felt the old weight settle behind his ribs. The one that came when a decision would stain, no matter how clean it sounded. What item? He asked. You know which. He did, or thought he did. A sealed gray case in Tuesday's shipment, heavier than it should have been for its size. No markings except a barcode Sarah couldn't scan. He'd almost asked about it, then hadn't because asking meant delay, and delay meant clients who found other roads. Small decision. The voice said, it shouldn't have left your floor. We need it returned to the point before your involvement. That point's gone. Nothing's gone. Things are archived. Rafe pictured filing cabinets, not warehouses. Systems. And if I can't, he asked. You can't, the voice said gently. You'll choose to. The call clicked off. No threat. Just punctuation. Ludo swore. Who talks like that? Someone who doesn't have to repeat himself, Sarah said. She pushed off the bench and crossed to a laptop, fingers already moving. Gray case, she murmured. Tuesday, Doc 3. Manifest says auto parts. Weight 14 kilos. Paid cash. Courier badge from a company that dissolved last spring. She glanced at Rafe. We moved a ghost. Rafe nodded once. Where'd it go after us? South route. Transferred to cold storage near the river. After that, she tapped, frowned. After that, there's nothing. Like it fell off paper. Ludo looked between them. So we go get it back. From who? Sarah asked. From nowhere. He opened his mouth, closed it. The kid Miko was still by the door, trying to look invisible. Rafe noticed him and felt a flicker of something like apology. None of this was the boy's mess, but mess spread. You can go, Rafe told him. Mika hesitated. The man said you'd understand fast. Ido. The kid left, footsteps quick on gravel. Ludo waited until the sound faded. Rafe. Say it. We ride or we don't. Sarah cut in quieter. If we ride, we admit we had it. If we don't, they adjust. Either way, we're already in their file. Rafe rubbed his thumb along the phone's edge. He thought about Mara, about the way she lined her shoes by the door like she might need to leave in a straight line, about the note she'd left that morning reminding him to eat something green once in a while. He thought about the gray case, about not asking. Cause, effect. What do you want? He asked Sarah. She didn't hesitate. I want to find it before they do, open it, and know why it matters. Information first. Movement later. He nodded slightly. Then he looked at Ludo. And you? Ludo's jaw worked. I want them nowhere near her. I want us loud enough they pick a different target. Two clean answers pointing opposite directions. Information meant time. Noise meant risk. Rafe let the quiet stretch until it hurt. He'd led long enough to know that choosing between good and bad was easy. Choosing between bad and worse was the real job. If we go loud, Sarah said softly, we burn favors. Doors close. And if what's in that case belongs to a system like his, loud just helps them map us. Ludo stared at the floor. So we sit. No, she said. We look without touching. Rafe watched them, the pull in his chest tightening because he could see both endings and neither kept everyone whole. Finally, he said, we split it. Sarah, you trace the river storage, quiet, no pings. Ludo, you take two and watch Mara's route from a distance, not close enough to spook anything. No calers, no cats. You're ghosts. Ludo frowned. That's half measures. That's the only measure we have, Rafe said. We don't chase. We don't threaten. We learn. He felt their resistance like weather, but they nodded because they always did when his voice went that flat. Sarah grabbed her jacket. Ludo headed for the door, then stopped. And you? He asked. Rafe looked at the phone. I wait. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Waiting is choosing them. Waiting is choosing not to lie yet, he said. She held his gaze a second longer, then left. The garage emptied until it was just engines and echoes. Rafe stood alone with the table and the map and the small decisions stacked behind him like dominoes already tipped. He knew the path he'd picked would cost something personal because it already had. He'd sent his people away from him when pressure was coming closer, not farther, and leaders weren't supposed to stand without their shadows. Still, he stayed there, phone in hand, accepting the trade he'd just made, because learning what was inside that gray case meant letting the man on the other end keep the initiative a little longer, and that was the price he chose to pay. The call from Sarah came an hour later, not rushed, which is how Rafe knew something had shifted in a way that couldn't be pushed back. And when he answered, she didn't say hello. She said, it's not a storage unit. And he could hear wine moving past her phone like she was standing somewhere open, exposed. It's a records facility, private, sealed contracts, legal archives. That kind of clean place where dust isn't allowed to settle because paper is more valuable than people. And Rafe closed his eyes once because that meant the gray case hadn't been cargo at all. It had been evidence that didn't know was evidence yet. You see it? He asked. No, she said, but I see the intake log through a cracked office window, and our case number's there with a red circle like someone already flagged it before we even touched it. He leaned his shoulder against the wall, concrete cool through his shirt. Anyone else around? Guard in a booth. One car in the lot. Engine warm. She paused. Rafe, this place isn't for storage. It's for leverage. That word stayed between them a second. Leverage meant whoever owned that system didn't break doors. They tilted floors. Stay there, he said. Don't move yet. I wasn't planning to, she answered, and he could hear the part she didn't say, which was unless you tell me to. He hung up and looked across the garage where Ludo should have been leaning against a bike, arms folded, but the space was empty because Rafe had sent him away, and for the first time since morning the leader felt the edge of doubt slide under his ribs, thin and precise. Cause and effect. He'd chosen information over noise. Effect was distance. The second call came before he could move, this one from Ludo, breath tight. She didn't go to work because she never left the block, Ludo said. Car's back. Same spot as this morning. Door closed now. Rafe straightened. You see her. No, street sound in the background. A dog barking somewhere far. Neighbor says she stepped out around 9, talked to a man by the curb, then went back inside. Curtains closed after that. Nobody's seen her since. Rafe swallowed once. You knock. You told me distance. Not accusing. Just fact. That was loyalty in its hardest form. Obeying even when you wanted to disobey. Rafe pressed his thumb against the bridge of his nose. Anyone else watching? If they are, they're better than me. A car passed near Ludo, tires hissing. Rafe, say it. He meant tell me to go in. Tell me to break the rule. Rafe didn't answer right away because he could feel the whole structure balancing on that word. If Ludo approached, whoever was applying pressure would know the message landed. If he didn't, Mara stayed alone with whatever sat behind her door. Decision. Consequence. He thought about her laugh, low and quick, the way she never asked about club business, but always knew when it went bad because he breathed different. He said, hold position. Silence on the line, not empty, just tight. Copy, Ludo said, and Rafe heard the disappointment get folded and put away. He ended the call and stood still long enough for the garage clock to click twice. Then the third call came, unknown number again. He answered. You're learning, the ordinary voice said. Rafe didn't bother asking how he knew about Ludo. You circled our case, Rafe said. Why? Because it's delicate, and because I wanted to see whether you'd notice. I noticed. Yes, you did. A faint sound like pages turning. Inside that case is a set of documents scheduled to be entered into a civil filing next week. Property transfers, shell companies, names that prefer not to be read aloud. When your crew moved it early, you shifted a timeline. Timelines matter. Rafe watched a drop of sweat slide down his wrist. You could have picked it up yourselves. We could have, the voice agreed. But then we wouldn't know how you behave with something you don't understand. Rafe's jaw tightened. Where's my wife? Safe, the voice said, and it sounded true, which was worse than if it sounded false. She's having tea. She asked sensible questions. I like her. Rafe didn't speak. The voice continued, almost conversational. The documents list a sequence of ownership that ends with a land parcel your club uses for storage. Legally, it suggests you acquired it through a chain tied to a fraud investigation. We both know you didn't draft those papers. But paper is persuasive. Rafe felt the floor tilt a degree. So you plant them, file them, and we spend years proving air is air. Exactly. Unless the case returns to the point before your involvement, where it belongs, and the timeline corrects itself. You're framing us to make us cooperate. I'm offering you the chance to remain ordinary, the voice said. Ordinary men with motorcycles. I find that image comforting. Rafe stared at the map without seeing it. And if I bring it back, then your wife finishes her tea and forgets she met me. The line stayed open. Rafe could hear breathing, patient, like a doctor waiting for consent. Across town, Sarah was watching a building that held proof of a lie not yet told. Down the street, Ludo was staring at a house he'd been ordered not to enter. And inside that house was Mara, who hadn't called because she trusted him to understand silence. Loyalty, Rafe thought, wasn't who'd bleed for you. It was who'd wait. He spoke slowly. The case is in a facility now. Not with us. Yes, the voice said. That's why this is your moment. You want me to take it. I want you to decide. Rafe almost laughed, but nothing came out. Cause. Effect. If he took it, he proved they could steer him. If he didn't, paper would erase them cleaner than bullets. He thought about the old failure, the man with half a hand, the sound of sirens that never quite left his sleep. He thought about Ludo obeying when he wanted to run, about Sarah waiting for permission she didn't need, about Mara pouring tea for a stranger who spoke like filing cabinets. If I do this, Rafe said, we're done after. No more calls. If you do this, the voice corrected gently, we won't need calls. That was the truest thing said all day. Rafe nodded to himself. All right, he said. I'll bring it back. He heard Sarah's whine through memory, Ludo's tight breath, Mara's quiet kitchen. Regret arrived early, right on time. He ended the call and didn't move for a long second because he knew the shape of what he'd just agreed to. He was about to steal evidence that could clear his club just to keep it from being used, and that meant choosing a lie that would live longer than the truth. And even before he pushed off the wall and reached for his keys, he understood this was the decision he'd carry after everything else was finished. Rafe didn't call the others back right away after he made the choice. Not because he doubted it, but because saying it out loud would make it real in a way thinking never did. So he stood there with the keys in his palm, listening to the garage settle, metal ticking as engines cooled, and he let himself feel the weight of what he'd just agreed to carry, which was not the job itself, but what came after, the quiet years where nobody would know why certain doors stayed closed to them and why certain favors were never offered again. When he finally called Sarah, he said only, I'm coming, and she didn't ask why because she already understood that tone, the one that meant the line had been crossed somewhere inside him. The ride to the records facility was short and slow, and nobody followed him because men like the one on the phone didn't need tales. They used expectation instead. And when he pulled up across the street, he saw Sarah leaning against a vending machine like she'd been there all night instead of an hour. Her face calm, but her fingers flexing once at her side. You decided, she said. He nodded. We take it. She watched him a second longer than usual. That fixes her, she said, not asking. That fixes her, he repeated. She looked at the building, then back at him. And us. Rafe didn't answer because that part didn't have a fix, it had a cost. Inside, the place smelled like paper and filtered air, the kind of clean that made you aware of your own dirt, and the guard behind the glass desk glanced up with a polite expression that didn't belong to a man guarding anything important. Sarah walked in first, holding a folder she'd grabbed from the garage, already talking. Delivery correction, she said, sliding the folder under the slot. Ms. Routed intake from Tuesday. Barcode mismatch. Her voice had that bored clerk tone she used when she needed systems to accept her as one of their own. The guard opened the folder, saw forms that looked official enough if you didn't study them, and shrugged like none of this mattered to his shift. Doc Hall, he said, pressing a button. A door clicked somewhere down the corridor. Cause and effect. Small eyes opening large locks. They walked past rows of metal shelves where boxes sat like sealed mouths, and Rafe felt something inside his chest tighten, not from fear, but from recognition, because this was what the voice meant by leverage. Rooms full of futures waiting to be decided by whoever held the right page. Sarah found the red-circled number on a clipboard and nodded toward a waist-high crate halfway down the aisle. The gray case sat inside it exactly how Rafe remembered, plain, patient, heavier than it should be. He lifted it, and the weight settled into his arms like a statement. For a second, neither of them moved. We don't have to open it, Sarah said quietly. He looked at the latches. No, he agreed, and flipped them anyway. Inside were documents, neat stacks, names printed in clean black ink, dates, signatures, transfers looping through companies that sounded like rainwater. And there at the end was the land parcel number he knew by heart, the lot the club used for storage, tied on paper to a chain of fraud that never happened. Sarah exhaled through her teeth. They built it perfectly, she said. Every link checks out, unless you already know it's a lie. Rafe closed the case. Truth didn't matter if proof disagreed. Down the hall, a phone rang at the guard's desk, distant and harmless. "We should go," she said. They carried it out the same way they'd come, footsteps steady, faces forgettable, and when they reached the bikes, Sarah watched him strap the case down. "You give them this," she said. "We stay clean on paper, but dirty in fact. They'll always know we bent." "They already know," Rafe said. She nodded once, accepting that. "Ludo?" she asked. Still watching, Rafe said. "Good," she replied, but her eyes said she wished he'd said different. The drop point was under an overpass where traffic noise erased conversations, and a man from the hood was there leaning against a concrete pillar. Same plain face, same cigarette, like he'd been waiting his whole life for this exact minute. Rafe parked, unstrapped the case, walked it over. The man didn't reach for it yet. "You're prompt," he said. Rafe held a handle. "She goes home first." The man considered that, then nodded once and took out his phone, tapped, waited. Somewhere a call connected. He said, "You can let her finish her tea," and hung up. Only then did he take the case. "No sreds. No thanks. Just transaction. You'll find," he said mildly, "that ordinary days are underrated." Rafe looked at him. "You'll find," he answered, "that ordinary men remember." The man smiled a little, not amused, just acknowledging a fact, and walked away carrying the future like a briefcase. Rafe stood there until the footsteps faded into traffic, then went back to his bike. Sarah didn't speak on the ride back. When they reached the neighborhood, Ludo was still across from the house, arms folded, eyes fixed. He looked at Rafe, question already dying because Mara's front door was opening. She stepped out holding her purse, saw them, and gave a small wave like they'd just arrived for dinner. No drama. No tears. She crossed the sidewalk and touched Rafe's sleeve. "You missed a call last night," she said gently. "I know," he answered. She studied his face, then nodded like she'd read the rest without asking. Ludo exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. Sarah looked down the street, checking corners that didn't need checking anymore. Nothing chased them. Nothing needed to. Back at the garage, the bikes sat where they'd left them, quiet witnesses, and the space felt different though nothing had moved, like a room after news has passed through it. Ludo clapped Rafe's shoulder once. Not celebration, just contact. Sarah went to the table and erased the map markings with the side of her hand until the roads blurred. Mara stood near the door, watching them the way you watch whether you can't change. "Is it over?" she asked. Rafe thought about the case, the papers, the man's calm voice, the way systems didn't forget. "This part is," he said. That was the truth he could give. The club hadn't been raided. Nobody had been dragged away. No blood stained the floor. And still something had been taken that wouldn't be returned, something quiet and structural, like trust in the idea that staying careful kept you safe. They moved around the garage slower that evening, speaking less, each of them carrying the shape of the day inside their chest. And when the sun went down, Rafe turned off the lights one by one until only the street glow came through the high windows, thin and gray, and he understood that justice hadn't visited. It had only passed by on another road, and what remained with them wasn't victory or defeat, but a lesson that would sit in the room from now on, patient as a sealed box, waiting to see what they chose next.